Hey YouTube, it's Chris. I'm with you here today to help you set up a PostgreSQL database on your Mac OS X environment. The purpose of this is to allow you to have a sandbox as you follow along with me through the SQL Fundamentals course that I'm setting up here on YouTube absolutely free. For all of you Windows 10 users out there, I will be setting up a video for you as well. Please check the description below for the link to that. And thank you for tuning in.
All right, so step one is going to be installing the PostgreSQL package from Brew onto your macOS localhost. Now, if you don't have Brew installed, I'll link a description, or in the description, I'll link it below how to install it, but we're not going to cover it in this video. It's just a package manager for the terminal and fairly easy to install with 1 or 2 commands. So in order to install Postgres, I'm assuming that you have, again, Brew on your macOS and that you can call it from the terminal. Let's make our terminal a little bit larger here for you to see. Might be a little too large. Perfect. And what we're going to type is we're going to type brew install PostgreSQL. Okay, so that installed Postgres onto our local system. Now we can make sure that it worked by typing in pSQL, H for host, and then we are locally hosting the database, so we'll use localhost for the server, and D for database, and we're going to go into the Postgres database, which is the one that's built on default when you install Postgres. And as you can see, the terminal here, it changed into that Postgres terminal. And so what we'll do here is we'll create a user as well as a database for us to build a sandbox in and load the AdventureWorks data into. So in order to do that, let's just type in create user, we'll call it student, and the next thing we want to do is give that user a password. Say with password learn SQL, and we're going to make that user a super user, which isn't best practice in a production environment, but since we're building a sandbox, we want to give you as the student access to everything in that database. So I'm going to hit enter. So that created that role. Now let's create a database called AdventureWorks with owner equal to student, and that will create the database for us. And then the next step is going to be loading the AdventureWorks data onto your database. We'll go through that next. Now that we have our database created and our user created and PostgreSQL downloaded to our Mac OS local system, we can go ahead and grab the AdventureWorks data for Postgres. It is located on a Git repository. I'll also link that in the description below, but in order to access it, we're going to have to run some Git commands to clone it into our machine. So now what we got to do is let's just exit out of the database code right here by pressing Control D. Then I'm going to hit clear to give us a clear console. And let's navigate to our documents folder just for a nice clean working directory. And as you can see, we can go ahead and copy that repo here by using this command. Git clone, and then followed by the HTTPS address of the Git repository. Again, look in the video description below for this. Perfect. So if we type in ls, we should see the AdventureWorks for Postgres directory. Let's go ahead and change directory to that. And as you can see, we have all the install files that we need. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to download the AdventureWorks CSV zip file from the Git repository. I'll also include a link for that in the description below. And when you click that link, our web browser will come up and it will ask us where we want to save the zip archive. I'm going to go ahead and put it in my downloads. And let's go ahead and open that. And as you can see, we have a ton of CSV files here. And these CSV files are the data that we're going to load into our database. So we need to copy these into our current working directory. So in order to do that, we're just going to select the first one, hold down the Shift key, and scroll to the bottom and click. You may have to use Command A. I had to there. For some reason the Shift key didn't work. I think it's because I'm on icons instead of a list. We're going to click on Copy, go to our current working directory, which if you remember right was in Documents under the AdventureWorks for Postgres directory. And we're just going to paste these right in here. Now that these exist in our current working directory, let's run this update csvs.rb by just typing in ruby update csvs.rb, and this will prep each of those CSVs to get loaded into our Postgres database. Okay, perfect. The next thing we need to do is we need to access the install.sql file that is in our current directory, and that, when it runs, it will take those CSVs and load them into our AdventureWorks database. So in order to do that, let's type in psql -upper u student AdventureWorks, and we'll put install.sql. Now this will copy our data into the database. Perfect. So at this point, we have our PostgreSQL database running locally on our machine and the AdventureWorks datasets loaded into it. Now let's show how to access that data. In order to access the data that we have now loaded onto our PostgreSQL database, we need to use a IDE, meaning a text editor. Now there's multiple IDEs, that have integration for PostgreSQL. My favorite personally is PyCharm. Now PyCharm is a paid IDE, so for the purposes of allowing you to use something that's free, I'm going to use Beekeeper, which is one of my favorite solutions that I found, and it's free to install for both macOS and Windows. So to access our database through Beekeeper and begin writing queries, we can click on that, and I'll include a download link to Beekeeper Studio in the description below. And as you can see, it's coming in here. Let's see if I can make it a little bit bigger for us. Awesome. So this is what Beekeeper Studio will look like when you launch it, and except you won't have any saved connections. I'll remove these. So this is what it will look like when you launch it. In connection type, I'm going to select Postgres, which is right here. And it pre-fills some of the options for us that are default. So our host is localhost, our port is 5432. We're going to leave that as is. If you remember, we created the user student and a password of learn SQL. And let's set our default database equal to AdventureWorks, because that's where we loaded the data into. Let's go ahead and test this connection, just make sure it works. It looks like we're authenticating to the database just fine. And let's save this connection and type AdventureWorks DB. And this will save the connection in Beekeeper so that every time you open Beekeeper, you won't have to re-enter your password. So that saved the connection. Let's go ahead and connect. Another note here, if for some reason your computer restarts or the Postgres service is stopped, you won't be able to access the database until you start up that Postgres service again. And so just FYI, in order to start the Postgres service, you would have to type in brew services start PostgreSQL. And if you run this command, it'll spin up the database again for you if it has stopped for whatever reason. Okay, going back to our IDE here, let's go ahead and just type in a simple query and ensure that the data was loaded correctly into the database. So I'm just going to type select star from human resources, which is a schema. You can see it on the left pane there, resources.employee. And when I run this, I should get a result. Great. It looks like I have 290 rows, so 290 total employees, and I'm able to access that data. So now you are ready to start following along in this course and can do so on macOS.